My name is John Kincheloe. I teach English here at the college, and I had this idea to come and talk a little bit about my ideas around the novel 1984, which is our WOLM for this year. And it's exciting for me to talk about it. It's one of my favorite books, and it's something I'm really interested in right now, especially in the context of some ideas around new media and how we participate online, and how it sort of parallels some of the ideas that Orwell was playing with in his novel. So the title of this presentation, as you probably saw, is hashtag noiseful impatient spiders, and you'll figure out what I mean by that in a second. So like any good beginning of a lecture on literature, I'm going to read a poem by Walt Whitman. This is called A Noiseless Patient Spider. A noiseless patient spider I marked where on a little promontory it stood isolated, marked how to explore the vacant vast surrounding, it launched forth filament, filament, filament out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding them. And you, O my soul, where you stand, surrounded, detached in measureless oceans of space, ceaselessly musing, venturing, throwing, seeking the spheres to connect them, till the bridge you will need be formed, till the ductile anchor hold, till the gossamer thread you fling catch somewhere, O my soul. So, one of the things that I thought about when I was trying to prepare this lecture is that really where I wanted to start it is kind of what do we do as people to sort of connect with the world around us. And that's really, so I thought about this poem by Whitman as an example or a metaphor for the connections that we make in life. And that he saw that, like the spider, as sort of a noiseless, patient process that lasted a lifetime, where you sought to seek out connections in your reality and make your life worthwhile and sort of define your reality at some level. And so he saw this sort of launching forth process as a way of seeking to connect with the world around us, in a way of defining and seeking the spheres around us to connect each other to the reality that we were in and to define and give value to our souls. And so I thought this was a beautiful metaphor for what I'm about to talk about, which is really the ways that we use media to connect with the world. So like the poem says, we are, I think, noiseless and patient at some level, sort of seeking to connect, and we're trying to make those connections with the world around us, right? But those connections are how we define our souls, and at some level, our reality, or at least our social reality. And so my question really for this is, what do our connections that look like today? What do they look like when we are seeking to connect our souls? And for me, I think it really comes down to ideas. It comes down to the thoughts that we have and the way we put them into the world and the way people respond to them and how we share them and proliferate them throughout our reality. And Orwell was concerned with this as well. I mean, you can see very early on in the novel him questioning this in the form of Winston, thinking about, when I write, when I question my reality, when I put down my thoughts in my diary, where is this going? What am I trying to do with this information? Who will this be for? And it's really a predicament, right? That unfortunately, he's not sure where when he casts out his ideas, where they will connect with the world around him. And even further, Orwell makes his own connection to nature when Winston and Julia are witnessing a bird singing in the forest and reaching out and asking of the bird what made it sit at the edge of the lonely wood and pour its music into nothingness, right? What is he seeking? What is that bird seeking to connect with in its life? And ultimately, how do we make that connection that defines our social reality? And so really, it came down to a couple questions for me in terms of these ideas. Is that for us in the 21st century, where do these ideas happen, right? What connects our measureless oceans of space? And for me, it comes down to one idea, and that's media. And media, as I'm defining it, is really the means by which we can construct, deliver, and share information and ideas that shape our collective social reality. And that can be a lot of things. It can be the speech I'm doing right now. It can be people talking back to me. It can be the signs we create to show each other what we mean to what we believe we have value in the world, how we dress, how we act, things like that. But really, there's two different types of media I'd like to focus on. There's old media, which is sort of the centralized forms that we're sort of used to in life. Things like print media, newspapers, television, radio, film, art, and literature, where you have sort of this centralized body constructing messages and sending them out to the world, right? And that the world that consumes those messages doesn't necessarily have a say or ability to connect. Now, new media changes that a little bit. And new media is basically everything from old media, but it involves this thing we call the internet. And the internet gives us this opportunity that's new in the sense that it's so much more participatory, it's so much more decentralized and constructed in a more complicated way that involves the connections between old and new media and the conversations happening on those new media platforms, right? So we can see the ways that we interact on social media, how we use streaming technology, how we use places like YouTube to connect with the world. And so what I really wanted to ask is that in Orwell's novel, he talks about control. He talks about the dangers of control of media forms and of information. And so what does the control of media entail is my big question for this. And why is too much control of media dangerous? Because we do see control of media. I mean, we have owners of companies that run new media technologies like Facebook and Twitter, and we have large editorial boards putting out their information on their various platforms. But what does this control entail, and why is it dangerous to have too much control? And that's really the questions I think that Orwell was asking in his novel, and how we can sort of interpret our own reality in the context of some of the things that he talks about. So, I'm going to talk about three ideas that are sort of phenomena in our own reality that I think connect really well with some of the ideas that Orwell is explaining in his, or he's playing with in his novel. The first one is computational propaganda. Then there's data analytics, and ultimately the greater polarization of media. So I'll start with computational propaganda. And this has become kind of a larger term over the past maybe year or so in our history in terms of how we've reacted to the 2016 election, to the Brexit campaign, and how people's opinions were shaped during that process. So the computational propaganda comes down to a couple things, and that's really the definitions of the words bots and trolls. And so I'll allow a video to explain those in a second right now.
They hide behind Twitter hashtags, Facebook ads, and fake news stories. They're the work of bots and trolls. And one of the most skilled countries at deploying them is Russia.
People.
Let's define what's what. A bot is short for robot. It's an automated social media account that operates without human intervention.
It's like a plane flying on autopilot. You can try and make an individual tweet look really popular by getting 100,000 bots to retweet it.
During the 2016 presidential election, suspected Russian operators created bots on Twitter to promote hashtags like War Against Democrats. A troll is an actual human being, motivated by passion or a paycheck, to write social media posts that push an agenda. In 2015, Savchuk worked undercover for over 2 months at a troll factory in Russia that has gone by many names, including Glavsit and the Internet Research Agency.
Я видела, как создаются посты и комментарии на тему США. И если, допустим, происходит что-то вроде, например, кто-то кого-то расстрелял, то эта тема подхватывалась и разносилась, и, в общем, многочисленные сотни троллей писали на разные лады свое личное отношение к этому.
Troll accounts are usually anonymous or pretend to be someone else, like hipsters or car repairmen, but it can even get stranger.
В моем отделе создавался образ экстрасенса женщины-гадалки, которая видит все, что видит вещи сны, и постоянно проводит какие-то ритуалы гадания, и видит тоже в кремлевском духе все, что происходит.
Trolls can also set up bots to amplify a message.
What you'll often find is that one individual troll is surrounded by lots of bots which will then retweet them.
Facebook is one common platform for Russian trolls and bots, which in 2016 used fake accounts to influence US elections. Here's how some experts think Russian intel pain.
Whoops.
They then
Excuse
allegedly created a site called DC Leak.
Sorry, I wasn't on the right thing. So, okay, so you know a little bit about what a bot is and what a troll is and how they work specifically in the 2016 election. So my definition of computational propaganda is pretty simple. And by the way, I'm not going to go over all these things that I have on the presentation. I encourage you to use that link that I set up at the beginning to peruse this presentation and click on some of these links to find out more about how automated and computational propaganda are working in our society to affect our nation, to affect what I'm talking about, which is the manipulation of the flow of information on new media platforms to affect political opinion, drown out issues with what I'm calling informational noise, and create social disorder. And really, how this connects back to the novel is, right, the use of bots and trolls to obfuscate the reality and importance of issues through this informational noise and political opinion really connects to Winston's job in the novel, which is that he works for the Ministry of Truth and is meant to define reality and redefine reality and constantly obfuscate that reality for the greater citizenry of Oceania. And he even says on page 46, what was needed was a piece of pure fantasy. And that's really what these bots and trolls are doing, is proliferating informational noise and even pure fantasies to try and keep people from understanding or focusing on the critical truths that are necessary for productive discussion and the process and progress of society. So this is really how computational propaganda is problematic in this sense. The next one, which connects specifically to computational propaganda at some level, is data analytics. And data analytics has become a big thing in our sort of collective consciousness right now because of Facebook and one particular company known as Cambridge Analytica. And this is a really interesting aspect of this because I feel like it connects really well to the novel as well in the context of how of the surveillance arm of INGSOC and how the construction of the society is based on the lack of privacy that people have. So I'll show a quick video about how Facebook collects data.
Most people know that Facebook has information about them. We submit things like our names, our hometowns, our ages, our birthdays, and our interests, and we assume that Facebook is collecting that data. But Facebook has much more data on most people than they realize. Facebook can take all the data that you submit and combine it with data from other users and outside information to construct a profile of you. Facebook uses nearly 100 different data points to classify your interests and activities. This would include basic stuff like your age and gender, but also more complicated information like whether you own a motorcycle or you recently went on vacation, or whether you're a gadget geek. Researchers have found that by using signals such as your likes and interactions, Facebook could tell if you were in a relationship or going through a breakup.
So they go through a bunch of different ways of how Facebook collects data. And what I should say is is that this particular process of collecting data was affected by Cambridge Analytica, which is a third-party company that came into Facebook using a process that Facebook deemed okay for them to do, which is basically create a third-party app, have people connect to that app, and then they were able to what's called scraping data from Facebook in order to collect that data and shape and activate political opinion using it. So they would construct messaging, they would share that messaging in order to create a particular image of a candidate or a political opinion that they wanted people to have via social media. And so there's been a lot of scrutiny over this in our reality, but you can see it as an example of how we construct, right, how the relinquishment of the sort of privacy is an element of how we can consider the parallels between our reality and that of Orwell's novel, and see that you know, the effect that this has on us, right? The way that we can remove the private life of a citizen can affect our ability to feel like we have a private life, to do that work of making connections and develop those opinions. If we're not sure where those opinions are coming from or how they're being developed in, you know, as an individual, we can't trust that the space that we're in is able to value that opinion in some objective way. And then ultimately that leads to a power relationship that is so unequal that companies like Cambridge Analytica become this kind of, you know, larger ingsoc relationship that they have with removing the private life and maintaining this 24-hour under the eyes and in the minds of official propaganda. So that's data analytics. I've been going a little quick because I want to get to my favorite one, which is polarization of media. So I'll talk a little bit about that now. So polarization of media really comes down to a couple things, and I think it's really interesting to think about these two concepts in relationship with Orwell's novel, specifically as it pertains to what are called echo chambers, or what I'm calling echo chambers of opinion, and then the concept of fake news, which is probably the most interesting one. So what I first want to do is lay some groundwork in terms of what polarization of media looks like, what our polarization of political opinion looks like, and I'll just show a quick video about that.
As this past week's battle over health care reminds us, the great divide in American politics shows no sign of closing or even quieting down. Our cover story is reported by Sunday Morning senior contributor Ted Koppel.
Increasingly, we Americans occupy alternate universes.
To be honest, I inherited a mess. It's a mess.
No, you inherited a fortune. We elected a mess.
There is very little common ground left, only battling perceptions of reality.
Are you all happy with the last 30 days?
Neither side seems to have much use for the other, and in this age of the internet and cable TV, very little is out of bounds.
Donald Trump, America's wealthiest hemorrhoid.
Democrats want to dissolve the borders. Isn't that what they wanted, open borders? Isn't that what the snake Obama did?
There are legions driving the country further and further apart.
President Trump has still done more for this country in the last 40 days than Barack Obama did in 8 years.
A Pew study finds 81% of voters say they cannot agree with the other side on basic facts, which may owe something to the president's campaign against fake news.
Of all of the media outlets, which one was the worst? CNN! Which one? CNN!
CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Just because of the attack of fake news and attacking our network, I just want to ask you, sir.
I'm changing it from fake news, though.
Doesn't that undermine...
Very fake news.
I know, but aren't you...
There's no...
Okay, so that's a really interesting report that Ted Koppel did about the polarization of media, and I find it's like a great way to kind of set the groundwork for what I'm talking about. You can see really represented in there how he does this kind of back and forth clips of the various opinion bases to see how these echo chambers are working, right? People are responding so positively to these extremely opinionated views rather than seeing some sort of middle ground. And that's kind of one of the more interesting things about the polarization of media is the construction of echo chambers and how it suppresses critical thought in a way that affects the way we can have productive discussions and ultimately define our reality and progress as a society. And so in Orwell's novel, I mean, there's a couple of different examples of this that I hope you might be thinking of. And the first one is the 2 minutes hate. At the beginning of the novel, we're presented with this world, with this room where Winston enters this kind of like figurative echo chamber. That's literally a room, but it's sort of this echoing of the opinions and emotions around a particular viewpoint, and that sort of rises and flourishes in itself and sort of feeds back in that same way, in the same way that we do on social media, where we like things or we watch the same thing and share the same clips of opinionated viewpoints and things like that, and how we sort of bifurcate the sense of opinion about one particular topic and sort of move through what I call like sort of parallel realities almost, where we can have completely separate viewpoints on the same subject and never cross paths in that process. And then ultimately there is a literal echo chamber. Once Julia and Winston sort of realize that they've been caught by the thought police, there is this moment where the room around them echoes their voice. And to me, that's sort of this metaphor for how the construction of an echo chamber makes it so hard to realize the outside forces that affect it. And so when I talked about computational propaganda and data analytics, the construction of an echo chamber makes it so hard to see that reality, to see the effect that it's having on us. And so when we define things like this, it's hard to come to grips with them because we've constructed such intense echo chambers and sort of silos of opinion. And so my favorite piece of this that really kind of gave me the inspiration to talk about this is the concept of fake news. And so one thing, the concept of fake news, right, as it's defined, is really this construction of false information for the purposes of driving political opinion, right? So it's either the information that's so politically spun that it's basically false and that people are sort of asked to believe it as sort of objective reality and then move forward with that opinion. And in an effort to kind of bring this into the forefront and the consciousness of our society, and this happened kind of, it was a phenomena that came out of the 2016 election, the Brexit campaign, other situations when actors were using things like computational propaganda to push false opinions so that they could spin belief and push opinion in one direction or the other. And what ended up happening is that people like our president and other individuals in the media started to try to redefine that or try to find examples of it in society. And when they did that, they weren't finding examples. They were finding examples that sort of fit for them at the time, right? Perhaps something they didn't agree with, perhaps something that was biased against them, things like that, but that weren't necessarily untrue. And in that situation, you have an example of both the concept of fake news, because saying that something that is fake news, saying something is fake news that isn't it, is an example of fake news, right? And you're also redefining that same concept in that effort, and therefore participating in a basic level form of what Orwell called doublethink or black-white, this concept of both believing and not believing the existence of an idea, right? And this is so fascinating to me because reading it out, you see that we use fake news, or certain individuals in our society use fake news as both something that works for them and against them. And in that world, we're working in this element of doublethink in a way that obfuscates the reality of fake news in a way that does not let us work for it, does not let it work for us anymore. Right? We can't identify it in reality as easily. So I'll give you a great example of this. There's a company called Sinclair Broadcast Group that is a large corporate media entity that owns a lot of local news affiliates around the country. They own about 60 to 70 news affiliates around the country. They'd like to own more, and they probably will, in which case, they might own up to 70% of the local news affiliates in our country. And one of the things that they do in owning these local news affiliates is send them information that they'd like them to present on their local newscast. And a lot of this information is sort of not really that important. Other information is very politically biased. And because we're so used to sort of local news affiliates not having a high level of editorial content, meaning not having a high level of opinionated content, this is somewhat jarring for the audience. And the most troubling case of this is when they sent a script that they wanted all their anchors to read on their local newscast. And this script is basically an example of what I'm talking about, because they were sort of arguing for the existence of fake news in content and news organizations and newscasts that they didn't agree with. So I'll play you a quick video of that, and then I'll talk a little bit about it.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 So I know that was probably kind of annoying at the end there, but I did want to say something about that, right? So if you listen to kind of what they were arguing in the piece, it's that they, in that they're arguing that there are a lot of different people using this fake news construct, presenting biased information, and that they're worried about it, right? This is Sinclair Broadcast Group talking in the voices of all their local news affiliates. Now, when they do that, right, they have also been accused of doing that work, right? Presenting biased material that isn't based on facts and is perhaps something like fake news, not really fake news, but something like it. And when you're both accused of it, right, when you're both demonstrating it while also trying to redefine it, you're participating in doublethink, right, where you both agree with the concept but also would like to just redefine it or not believe it, right? So there's one more example of this that I really want to share, and they're called deep fakes. And so this is a kind of new idea that's sort of come out in the last year or so. Deep fakes are basically a video technology where you can take any person, and as long as you have a video of them speaking, you can make them say whatever you want. And so how usually this is done is you sort of transpose your voice over the top of somebody else's mouth in a way that is kind of indiscernible to the naked eye. Another way you can do it is you can use audio technology to construct their actual voice saying those words, even though they never said them. And this is an example, I think, of an even like a higher degree of this element of the polarization or the construction of a false reality, because now not only can we can't trust what people are saying, but we can't trust that they're actually saying them. And that's what really what really makes it most troubling. So I want to show you this video. I do want to apologize. There's some very strong language in it. It's meant to be provocative and provide sort of a PSA for the concept of deepfakes. So I'll just play it now.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. It's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you. And stay woke, bitches.
All right, so that's President Obama saying some things that he's never said before. Obviously, you can see that that gentleman on the right, Jordan Peele, who's a famed comedian and director, created that video to sort of explain and express the sort of the troubling aspects of deepfakes as a technology. And this technology is becoming more and more prolific in our society. And so one of the things, you know, my own PSA is to watch out for it in your own watching of videos and how we share and how we construct the reality that we're trying to move forward with. And so we can see this is an example of not only the argument being fake, but the person saying it being fake, which is the definition of sort of this obfuscation of reality in a very troubling sort of Big Brother type manner. So I've gone through these three concepts, and now I kind of want to wrap them up into one idea, which is to say that, you know, when we look at this bird singing its song out into the nothingness, you know, what troubles me the most is whether or not, you know, we will end up like Julia asking or coming to the decision that this bird was not singing to anyone, right? This bird was simply singing. And in that world, we're no longer able to define what our reality is, so we're no longer able to decide whether or not we've made a connection or not. And we can think that we have made a connection, but that connection has been obfuscated and shifted and shaped so many times that we no longer know whether it's real or whether it's something that was given to us by some larger powerful entity or just some person that wanted to make fun of us, right? So it's really this process of thinking about that Winston and Julia both go through, and it ends in tragedy for them. But I did want to show one more video to sort of help express this concept and to think about the questions: what if our connections and ideas mean nothing? And what if the control of media makes real connections too difficult or impossible? And really, this last video is so, I really wanted to get to it. And I was recently thinking about this lecture and watching sort of the latest season of the show X-Files, The X-Files, which they rebooted recently. And it's been kind of hit or miss over the course of me watching it again, because I love the original run of the series. But they had this episode that really made me pause, and it was called The Lost Art of Forehead Sweat, where they dealt with this idea kind of in a funny sort of tongue-in-cheek way about how we define reality and how things like fake news and the obfuscation of reality through the things I've been talking about affect our ability to define the reality that we live in. And so you're going to see two characters on screen. You're going to see Fox Mulder, who's the star of the show, played by David Duchovny. And you're going to see a character known as Dr. They, who happens to be in the episode this sort of shadowy, overarching figure that is sort of pulling the strings of reality at some level. And they have this interchange that I believe you could read as if Winston was ever to meet Big Brother, this is what their exchange might look like.
Dr. They, I presume?
Kids today don't even know what this means. Why should they? I mean, when's the last time someone admitted doing something they were ashamed of? Even if caught on tape or doing it, they just say, well, that was taken out of context.
Yes, but why are you shaming me?
Someone who spent his life seeking the truth behind every great conspiracy, and you're only now finding out about me?
Perhaps it just goes to show how good you are at hiding in the shadows.
Who's hiding? I'm in the phone book. But nobody knows what's a phone book anymore.
I have to admit, what little I know of you, I got from a rather dubious online video.
Oh, did you like that? I made it. It's my new platform, Phony Fake News. It's a presentation of real facts, but in a way that assures no one will believe any of it.
To what end?
The bitter end. Which is why, when I became aware that you were finally aware of me, I felt a professional courtesy to meet with you and to tell you this in person. You're dead. Oh, that came out wrong. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I meant your time, Agent Mulder. Your time is past.
Okay, so what is or what was my time?
Well, it's a time when people of power thought that they could keep their secrets secret and were willing to do anything to keep it that way. Those days are past, gone. We're now living in a post-cover-up, post-conspiracy age. And I no doubt the kids will come up with some catchphrase for it. Poco, or something they'll say like, oh, that's so poco. That'll make you wish you really weren't dead.
As long as the truth gets out.
They don't care whether the truth gets out because the public no longer knows what's meant by the truth.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, no one can tell the difference anymore between what's real and what's fake.
There's still an objective truth, an objective reality.
So what? I mean, you take this Mandela effect. Well, in the old days, I would never have come out and admitted to you, yes, I can change people's collective memories. And that would have meant that I can control the past. And if that's true, well, as Orson Welles once said, he who controls the past controls the future.
It was George Orwell that said that.
For now, maybe. Anyway, the point is, I can tell you all of this right out in the open because it doesn't matter who knows about it. They won't know whether to believe it or not.
To be honest, I'm not believing any of this.
Well, believe what you want to believe. That's what everybody does nowadays anyway. You're only proving my point, you twit. But full disclosure, you're right, I can't control people's minds. Although it turns out you don't really have to. All you need is some people to think it's possible. And then you've sown the seeds of uncertainty. All you really need is a laptop.
So that's what this has all been about? The spread of online disinformation?
Maybe. You know, our current president once said something truly profound. He said, nobody knows for sure.
What was he referring to?
What does it matter?
All right, so there it is. The true, ending to all of this is what does it really matter, right? And how can we define our reality in a way that makes meaning, in a way that connects our spheres like Whitman wanted us to, and the way that we send our filaments out to hoping to make a connection to prove our value and prove our survival. And so I didn't want to leave with that point. I didn't want to leave with this, very depressing kind of Ingsaki type view of the world. Instead, I wanted you to realize that, the internet, while it can be a troubling space that reflects Orwell's ideas, it can also be a space for productivity and for change and for real action. And so my title is actually in reference to what I'd like you to be rather than what, Ingsoc and Orwell would think you are, which is noiseless, patient, and being affected by everything around you. And so what I want you to be is a noiseful, unpatient spider, in the words of Newspeak. And how do you be that? Well, you realize that the internet is a neutral tool, okay? The ways that it's affected by actors and the ways that it's constructed and changed for us are because it is a neutral space, a space that's not affected by, that can be harnessed by anyone. And it's just really these actors who know how to use it that are utilizing it in the ways that I've been talking about. So if you can be in that powerful space, you can be collaborative. You can work together to define your social reality in the way that is objective and that will progress society in ways that are productive. And that you can participate in really new and exciting ways, in ways that help you change how powerful you are in the space. And that ultimately this leads to the sort of development of collective intelligence. And while that collective intelligence might be effective, as long as we maintain a critical eye on it, we can have it be powerful and an important space and an important set of intelligence. And ultimately to take our power, to harness the power of this neutral space and use it for the good of our society. And so how do you do that? Well, you do things like hashtag use social media for social change. right? You practice digital literacy, right? You look at the information and think about it and figure out where it comes from. You critically engage with one another and don't create an echo chamber using places like the Outside Your Bubble organization that is run by BuzzFeed. You hashtag Be Noisy by creating activist moments online where you define your own truth and you send it out into the world and get people to organize around it and go out into the world and create activism. And then you hashtag Be Impatient, and you go out and you vote for people who will help you define this reality and construct this space in the way that we want it, and beat back some of the actors that I've been talking about, and beat back the space that we've created for ourselves and created in the way that we want. And so I'll leave you today with a quote from the novelist Cory Doctorow, who was very prophetic about he was talking about the nature of our construction of the internet and how people have perceived it in the context of novelization, how people have constructed it in novels, obviously Orwell being one of them. And he told us that he doesn't really feel that, ultimately we are at a complete loss when it comes to this stuff. So let me see if I can get into this, but I think it's going to be tough because it wasn't working before. So I wonder. Yeah, no, it's this thing. Okay, let's see. Hold on. 23 VCJ5. So let's try that real quick. I got a couple of seconds to play this. It's very important. I promise. You'll love it. Hold on. Let's see if that works. Here we go.
I think the internet is the nervous system of the 21st century. It's like a single wire that delivers free speech, a free press, freedom of assembly, access to education, to tools, ideas, communities, every other accomplishment that we use to measure whether or not a society is a good one. And so instead of being optimistic or pessimistic, I'm hopeful. And hope is a thing that I think is familiar to anyone who's ever plotted a novel. It's the idea that if you can solve the problem that's immediately before you, that from that new vantage point, you will see solutions to the problems that are past the problem that's immediately before you. That doing one thing to improve your situation suggests another thing to improve your situation. That's really how a plot works. Like the future is not on rails, right? Like we get a different future depending on what we do. The only way science fiction could be predictive is if the future didn't change based on what we did.
In other words, science fiction can only rehearse the future. It's our job to make it a good one.
Thank you very much. All right, so I'll go to the back channel if people wrote anything. It looks like, okay, here we go. So I can take these, or I can take like questions in the old school manner. Maybe I'll start here. There was only a few, so when people are the products in terms of how social media, search engines, etc. What defines the morality of capitalism, of that freely given information for use of those systems? It's a great question. I think, people are the products at some level because of the effects that it has on, especially when social media and things like that, right? We think about the basic business model of places like Facebook and Twitter, which is to sell ads based on data and the way that they organize that. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to go away, but I think some of this critical engagement, right, with that particular fact, with data analytics and computational propaganda, has sort of driven some of the internet to realize, right, some of the powerful forces on the internet. I mean, Zuckerberg, in his testimony, said that there will always be one level of Facebook that's free. And to me, that says, okay, they're still living by that basic business model that they have to sell ads to make money. But at some level, he's being affected, right? He's not going to, he might make another level, right? One of the answers that people have given to the construction of the internet is to create a paywall, is to create a space that is exclusive at some level and that we can police a little bit better. And I know that sounds weird in the sense of how I just said that it was like a neutral tool that anyone can use. That's true, but there is some element of kind of give and take there that is troubling and does affect some of these systems, but it should be sort of help you feel good that you can participate in the same way that these things are being affected, and that we can find spaces that aren't affected by that in different circumstances. Did I answer that question at anybody that asked that? Okay. Let me see if I can go down. Oh, it's nice. Is this a serious question? No. Okay. So INGSOC, I should have said English socialism. It's the party from Orwell's novel 1984. So it's not INC-SOC, it's INGSOC, right? England and socialism being the second word. So sorry if that was confusing. Yeah, there you go. But it was a little bit more nefarious than what his ideas were about, I guess. Do you feel like new media is the only reason we would discover fake news? Can fake news altogether be just trolls and bot creating noise? Altogether. Can fake news altogether be? I guess, so yeah, I feel like new media is how fake news became what it is, what we think about it as. Now, we used to call fake news things like yellow journalism and the construction of biased content presented as fact, right? Editorial content presented as fact. But now we have this whole new realm where we create false information and we proliferate it. And it's sort of the fake news phenomena is a new media phenomena in the way that it's defined by the people who study it, in the sense that it's created and proliferated for the purposes of shaping opinion online. Now, it is, I mean, at some level, fake news is just creating noise, and that kind of is the problem, I think, at some level, is that noise makes it harder to see the truth. So I hope I answered that question. Yeah, Ed. Right.
And maybe the internet is not neutral in a way that we should know before we go on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a great thought. I mean, this is a great debate happening right now, especially in the context of things like Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, is that we have this conversation that, like, the medium itself affects us, right? Being on Facebook affects how we think about the world, and using social media affects how we perceive our reality and our social reality. Now, what I meant by neutral tool is that the concept of how it's affecting our perceptions and our opinions and things like that, and how it affects our ability to kind of create these emotional, opinionated spaces, I guess, is really, it's not a new idea. So like we had sort of these negative opinions about old media constructs that, like I talked about yellow journalism already, but then also examples being the negative influence of television, and things like that sort of, we thought that, yeah, the medium was the effect, but we're seeing that it's not necessarily the medium that is the main effect of a particular, especially when it comes to new media, is that it can be a neutral space. And then if we view it as something affecting us, maybe it will affect how we participate in it, but also it will kind of make it harder for us to sort of see it as a powerful space. And I want people to see it as a powerful space for productivity, I guess. Does that make sense? I don't know. Sort of.
You kind of answered both sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fine.
How do you think this will relate to the future way we define the concept of freedom? If you look at Western definition of freedom, we have it being basically you're able to do whatever the hell you want, whatever the hell you want, in any way, shape, or form, versus an Eastern version is more a freedom from societal chaos. Do you think we will eventually go more towards an Eastern view of freedom versus a Western with this?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I don't know. I'm not a futurist, but I do think that the ideas we have about the internet being a collaborative neutral space lend more to your definition, the first definition, the Western definition, which is that we can create, we can create the truth we want in a sort of collective intelligence manner, and that we are sort of seeking to find this social reality and using rhetoric and leaning on elements of sort of the nature of truth to define our reality together, and that is a sense of freedom in and of itself that's new to the way that we think about our democracy. Now, the freedom as social, as anti-social slavery is a really interesting idea, because China is really working against an particular Eastern country is trying to work against some of that idea, in that they define the lack of social slavery as being surveilled, and they have this new concept they call the social credit score now in China. I'm not sure if people have heard about this, but basically what it is if you sort of either you transgress via breaking laws, or you do things like not enough community service, it affects what's called your social credit score, and that goes down, and then you're not allowed certain privileges like flying on planes or getting a driver's license or having basic freedoms as a citizen. And now they make the argument that that is kind of this element of like, we are creating a space that is morally good. We're creating a society that is morally good. Now, we can question that, but that's what they're saying, is that the freedom is this escape from social slavery, where we don't have to worry about people transgressing against us as much in a space in our society. Does that make sense? I don't know. So there's definitely elements, because they use new media technology to do that. They use things like they check your Twitter feed for transgressions against the government, and they check large surveillance arms of their politics. They use like computational AI to like surveil people and watch whether or not they're like jaywalking and things like that. So it's kind of troubling, but it is an example of, I think, what you're talking about. And I think, so what do I think? I think that the freedom is how we're going to define it. I mean, if we allow people to sort of define what is morally good online for us, and then we sort of live in that, like that's going to be the second answer. But if we sort of define the space for ourselves and we use it for what we want to do, then it's going to be something different, I think. Rachel. Yeah.
And then on top of that, even with things that are probably going to be accessible like Facebook, you have that in conjunction with, a capitalistic structure that's been proven to be used for nefarious purposes, and that the ownership isn't to the people that are using it, but to their clients who are paying for that information. So within the realm of our current reality, what's currently being worked on, how do you see that really coming to play?
I mean, the net neutrality conversation is an important one in this context, because it does purport to kind of change this conversation at the basic level. I mean, it's going to affect how the sort of quote unquote owners of the internet, in the sense of the owners of the physical spaces that the internet lives in, will be able to harness some power over it. And that's troubling. And I think that's, I don't know, if we haven't been in a world like that yet. So I don't know how it's going to affect broad scale, how we're able to participate in the space in that way. I mean, how, it could be as simple as like, okay, you just need to pay a couple of extra bucks to watch a Netflix video, but it could be some level of shutting down, sort of more open source voices and places where the internet really thrives, and where the voices can really be heard, places where we find the most value. But I mean, so it would be like that last point of trying to fight against something like that, fight against the sort of structure of the space as it exists, as it stays neutral, right? And going back to Ed's point, if we lose net neutrality, we lose that basic level of that neutrality, right? That's what I mean by net neutrality, obviously. Sir.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback
Yeah.
The president is standing up there saying that Assad perpetrated a chemical attack on his own people, and the international community and the other people researching this demonstrate that, one, it's a complete lie, and two, they may not have even been an attack, and three, it may have been completely fabricated by the White Helmets.
Sure.
So we are in a classically Orwellian situation of perpetual war for perpetual peace.
Right.
With fake information.
Right.
The guy who maybe legitimately won the election saying about fake news. So, to the extent that I understand that neutrality means these algorithms that will filter out those like myself who have this belief, I won't be allowed to say that
Sure.
in public forum, then my ability to make noise and
Yeah.
communication in the very same way you described, which is what I've been doing for decades,
Right.
is going to be circumscribed.
Right.
Or
Right.
mildly eliminated.
Yeah.
So without being paranoid, how do you, or pessimistic, how do you deal, what is your response to
Yeah.
in terms of what she's asked also?
Yeah.
It's a very bleak situation personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just being, you know, I think that it is, yeah, I mean, I don't really necessarily, like I said, have an answer to that particular like idea. I think that, you know, it's an example of what I was talking about as the troubling aspects of the internet. And so, you know, if we can't maintain the neutral space, then we can't maintain that freedom to sort of speak against and present the information in a way that's more objective, in a way that sort of moves us forward. Now, you know,
or at least is in opposition
Sure.
to the official narrative.
Sure.
Which would be the classic definition of free speech.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That seems to be going away.
Right.
In a totalitarian, whether communist, fascist, or Orwellian sense.
Sure.
And do you agree? Are you agreeing with me that this is the trend?
I mean, yeah, it's like I'm sorry. Sorry, yeah, I do think, you know, like I said in the presentation, I think that there's elements of it that are sort of pushing us that way, right? And how we fight against it is how we think about kind of our own power in the space and our own privilege in the space in that sense, and how we sort of create the space for ourselves. And I know that, you know, it is trending in that troubling direction, and that's the unfortunate, you know, part of all this, is that we have to see that, right? But honestly, seeing that and being cognizant of it is part of, right, because that was one thing that was so hard for Winston in the novel, was that he saw it and yet wasn't able to do anything about it, right? Wasn't able to perform in the space at all, that all of it was for naught. And so for us, I think that it is productive, that we can be, you know, can be noisy in that sense, and can be, you know, still maintain that kind of level of, and it will, you know, play out over the next few years as to how we're going to actually make this work for ourselves and make the space work for ourselves before, you know, more powerful forces might affect it. You know, I always go back to Chuck Klosterman, who says that, like, we should practice self-directed action and be participants in the space, right? And not wait to react to things like this, and wait, you know, instead go and learn about the space and participate in it, like it sounds like you are. So that's great, you know, all great stuff. Any other thoughts, questions? I'm running up against time here, but I don't want to, I know I'm not running up against time. I got a bunch of time, to be honest, but we can be done if you want. Do I really think we can create a collective intelligence? Absolutely. I mean, we already are in places like Wikipedia and other forums where we construct and debate on reality, and debate on truth, and debate on, like, events of what's happening in the world. The way we construct it via new media is very much, I mean, you look at something like the Parkland shooting, which was so tragic, and yet we found out so much about it because of this active participatory media creation that was going on. Students were taking Snapchat videos, and there was a lot of information coming from other places, and it was sort of coalescing on the internet in a way that was allowed us to sort of give us a wider picture of what happened there, and how we could sort of go forward with the knowledge with that, and think about how it's affecting, you know, our reality in the future. And you know, there's lots of different examples of that, and like how we participate online to sort of create and share our perspectives with the world, and use that and sort of add that to the collective intelligence sort of pile that we've created, and debate about it and figure it out together, rather than allow some outside force to tell us kind of what's going on, and just take that passively and be reactionary in that sense. Does that make sense? Yeah, so, yeah. How can we work to, I mean, yeah, again, this power of participation is so important in the, how can we work to improve their concept of reality, or concept and reality in the sort of older generations that don't believe in fake news. I mean, just participating and encouraging them to participate, showing them videos like I showed, and sort of talking about what that would, you know, what that means, and having this sort of productive debate, productive discussion. I mean, this is so important. Being critically engaged with sort of the world around us is so vital now more than ever. And having kind of, you know, a basic set of toolboxes in terms of critical thinking and things like that. Being in this space right now as a critical thinker, you're on your way. Question? Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and a question we should all be asking ourselves, I think. She asked about how how do we engage in critical discussion when it's so easy to be locked in an echo chamber, or to not appreciate the opinions of other people, and how, right? And it comes back to a lot of different models. I mean, the calling in model is one, in the sense of how we engage with people, and we appreciate their perspective, and we value it, and then we... So the calling in model. Yeah, so we call into the space in the sense of, when we have conversations, and they can happen online or in our real life, we call in to the people who may disagree with us, and ask them to share their thoughts, and ask them to come to the table, and we value them, and we sort of affirm their beliefs, and we understand, and we try to restate, and then we reframe using their language in a sense that sort of moves the conversation forward with both opinions. You know what I mean? Things like that sort of engage in critical discussion, and sort of the basic models of critical thought are really important, in how we engage with sort of, agreement and disagreement. We think about balancing arguments. We think about, approaching discussion. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard work, and it's work that we all have to do, I think, as a society in general, to be productive, and to stay away from, the trends of moving into echo chambers and flame wars and things like that are so easy to happen online. And
you are aware they're criminalizing free speech. They're saying if you oppose forced vaccinations, then that's being criminalized. If you oppose BDS, if you're in favor of BDS, that's considered hate speech, and that will be either censored or in some places criminalized.
What's BDS? Sorry.
Boycott, protesting Israeli policy for settlement out in this West Bank.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I should have known.
And sanctions, okay?
Yeah.
That's been criminalized.
Yeah.
Made illegal. So I'm not trying to refute what you're saying.
No, not at all.
The obstacles are growing.
Yeah.
And the trend is, to me, Orwellian.
Right. For lack of a better word. Absolutely. I mean, it's, there's a lot of sort of troubling aspects. He's talking about the forms of protest in the Middle East being sort of criminalized for as they are about free speech in terms of the transgressions against a particular viewpoint. And like I said, in China, that's sort of, and there's examples of that as well. And so yes, there are aspects of it that it's important to be aware of, and it's important to sort of combat against as people as we are now, and to critically engage with as much as possible. And hopefully we can start to shift it back. I mean, obviously, I might be up here when we do 84 again, and I might have 10 more examples of what we're talking about. But it's just important to know things like that, to know and to recognize and to critically engage with ideas like that, to see it as a violation of free speech, and to see deep fakes as a violation of our definitions of truth and things like that.
My answer to Rachel's question is humor.
Yeah.
I've been much more effective in my ability to be heard. The less I take myself seriously, and the more I make it playful or somehow interject
Sure.
humor into it. Because in the last resort, even if it's gallows humor,
Yeah.
maybe all we have left.
That's the way. I mean, yeah. Yeah.
But I wasn't either, and I'm 73, and it took me decades. But
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts, questions? Oh, all right. I'll be done. Sure, why not? Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate all the questions. I hope I answered them. Feel free to talk to me after, whatever you want to do. Thank you so much. Are you taking this? Okay. Sorry, I think it's still on. Hold on.